the hype, and I think stem cell tourism overpromises, to be completely honest. But I, as a person, I am a conservative researcher. I do clinical trials for a living, but I honestly believe there is a hope from stem cells. So let's talk about what the real hopes from the real science actually looks like. First of all, there is a lot of clinical research underway with humans. So here's for example, of just last year when you put this number in, but it's just fractionally over this if you were to put it in today. This is the biggest website of registered clinical trials, trialling any kind of drug or stem cell or experimental treatment with humans in the world, clinicaltrials.gov, so you can always see what's being researched. And you find 5,000 plus studies of, if you just search for stem cells. So where are these trials happening? So, and let's look at the total number. So if you look at this line, the first thing you notice, it's just going up year by year. There are more and more studies, and the number of studies is down the left there. So we're talking in the hundreds of trials that are actually underway. And where are these trials happening? Well, the blue line and the red line are the US and China, so obviously countries with very big populations who have also spent a lot of money on medical research are doing a lot of these studies. But the UK and Australia and New Zealand are certainly the next biggest players, and so there is a lot of research happening here in our country too. What types of cells are we using? And we'll come to these. So the one that's had the most interest from people is something called MSC, so mesenchymal stem cells. These are stem cells you can derive from bone marrow and other places. Umbilical cord blood is another way to get them. And the reason they've been so interesting to people is that A, they're easy to get, and B, we know how they behave. They always make more of the same kind of cells. They don't do anything different. And they seem to have, it's a little bit out of date now, but there was this term put next to them called immune privilege. So if you gave me your heart, I'd have to have immunosuppression as so I didn't reject that heart. But with MSCs, there's no rejection issues between patients. We're still looking at that more in more detail, but it doesn't seem like that patients reject these cells. So they're very easy to get a hold of and transfer from one donor to the next person. So that makes them very interesting, why they've had a lot of research. Now, there's another kind of cells called T cells, which are under a lot of investigation currently for cancer and looking very promising. Bone marrow in the light green, you can see, was on the continue, but because we know so much about bone marrow now, people are starting to look at other sorts of cells. We know what bone marrow can do. It can certainly help a couple of diseases very, very well. So we're looking at other cells now. Adipose tissue or fat tissue, and I'm ready to be a donor at any point. But the use of that type of cell is on the increase. I think there was an embargo put in the US last week on perhaps some safety margins around those cells. And then embryonic stem cells, ES cells, as I said, the line's kicking up a little bit there with more use of those cells. And what sort of specialties and diseases are thinking about cells? Cancer obviously gets a lot of investigation using stem cell interventions, but the second most popular group or biggest group getting studied is neurology, actually. So that includes cerebral palsy, brain injury, disorders of childhood for developmental conditions, autism, spinal cord injury, ataxias, all sorts of movement disorders. So neurology, anything to do with the brain and the spinal cord system, is the second biggest focus of stem cell work. And then of course musculoskeletal, orthopedics is getting a lot of focus, and cardiovascular and skin as well. So if we were to have a look what's going on in childhood disability and adult disability, if you were just quickly to look at what number of trials are registered, this is the sort of volume of trials looking at stem cells for these different indications. So inborn errors of metabolism, which can result in permanent disability, cerebral palsy, intellectual disability, autism, a brain injury at birth from encephalopathy, and vision problems after prematurity. So all of those are being currently investigated of whether they might respond to stem cells. And in 2012, I was very privileged. Alan Trounson, Professor Alan Trounson, who is a very famous Australian scientist from Monash who really did 9 of the first IVF cases in the world, and then was a leading scientist, and then redirected his efforts to stem cell, was headhunted by the Americans to be the president of the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine. And that is the largest stem cell funding agency in the world. And Alan is a great leader, and Alan directed a lot of this field and saw that money was spent on really good research. And in 2012, I was lucky enough to participate in a 40 group of stem cell scientists who were the best people in the world, really, to look at how scientifically viable were stem cells for a condition like cerebral palsy and other neurologic conditions. And the 40 group unanimously agreed that cell replacement therapies are an exciting and eventual option for treating cerebral palsy. And cerebral palsy could be an important testing ground for stem cell replacement therapies in the brain. So what did they mean by that? Well, if you have a neurodegenerative disorder like Parkinson's or MS, if you're going to transplant a new cell into an environment that already has inflammation, it's got attacking processes going on, it's very difficult to get engraftment of cells into that unhealthy environment that is already decaying other cells in the environment. Whereas in cerebral palsy, the injury happens either during pregnancy for 80% of cases or around the time of birth for 10% and 10% after birth. It's a stable injury. The injury's over. The brain injury is finished, and so putting new cells into that environment is much more hospitable to the uptake of those cells. And so these scientists not only thought was stem cell a viable intervention for childhood disorders like autism and cerebral palsy, but that whatever we learnt from those conditions would help adults with neurodegenerative disorders, where it was going to be harder for us to get a success quickly because of the environment we're trying to put cells into. So that makes this work very, very important.